Haifaa Al-Mansour's coming of age, Wadjda, follows a young Saudi girl's journey in obtaining a green bicycle. The protagonist, Wadjda, who lives in the capital Riyadh, is headstrong, ambitious, and beats to the sound of her own drum. She does not hesitate to ignore the social and cultural guidelines around her, making Wadjda the ultimate personification of childhood rebellion. It is through this resistance that she not only obtains her bike, but also her freedom of movement, whilst unconsciously inspiring others in her social sphere that is now time for change. Being set in Saudi Arabia, Al-Mansour utilizes Wadjda to explore and provide a much deeper understanding of womanhood and feminism within the kingdom. The themes of rebellion and movement are intricately woven together and constantly complement each other against the backdrop of feminism and coming of age within Saudi Arabia. One thing that Al-Mansour does wonderfully in Wadjda is that she effectively encapsulates the trials and tribulations of childhood, putting away the analytical eyes of politics and ethics. Wadjda is a film that simply tells the story of a young girl's journey in obtaining a bike. Wadjda is just like any other kid her age. She is mischievous, curious, often in trouble, and she struggles to make friends. At the end of the day, she's a kid, so it is to no surprise that she possesses childlike desires and acts with her self-interests high on her list of priorities. For instance, her primary motivation to get the bike is so that she can play and race against her friend Abdullah. For her society, this kind of behavior and thought process is perceived as disruptive and disorderly. Since there are many unspoken rules and guidelines in which each person within society has a specific role to play, considering this, it is understandable why her self-serving attitudes and behaviors are automatically interpreted as rebellious to everyone else around her. For Wadjda, there are only two locations that have any significant value: at home and at school. These are also the only locations in which our female characters can interact with each other freely. As they are considered to be female domain in traditional Islamic societies, at home it is Wajda's mother's duty to teach her the rules and her place, which is in the kitchen and second to the men of the house. It is a woman's duty to be hidden and separate from the men in male-dominated spaces, unless they are of kin. Both Wadjda and her mother spend most of the time in their house. Interestingly, when they're not talking about why Wadjda cannot ride or have a bike, they're either talking about Wajda's father or the woman's role within the house. For instance, Wajda's father's decision to marry another woman, and when Wadjda reads the names of her ancestors on a family tree. Being traditionally patriarchal, Saudi Arabian families place a significantly high value on sons, as they are the ones who are expected to carry on the family name, traditions, and values. Moreover, they are also viewed as public representations for the family, as they can flow in and out of public and private domains. As a direct act of rebellion, Wadjda writes down her name and places it onto the tree. Although she may not completely understand them, Wadjda acknowledges these rules and guidelines, and it is apparent that she simply does not care for them. Comparatively, school acts as the place where Wadjda will learn how to become a woman in a man's world outside the home. It is her teacher's job to guide her to become a submissive and pious woman. Wajda's head teacher, Ms. Hussa, is adamant in her mission to prepare students like Wadjda to become valued female citizens and future wives. Ms. Hussa's strict attitudes regarding dress code and moral conduct is aimed to shame, punish, and crush any form of divergence from the expected norm of obedience and submissiveness. For example, when two girls are caught skipping class and holding hands, they are shunned in front of the whole school in order to discourage others from committing this shameful act. The effects of Ms. Hussa's strict attitudes are apparent, especially when Wajda's classmates all run inside for cover and out of sight after spotting some men working on a rooftop nearby. Additionally, Ms. Hussa's agenda is further demonstrated when Wadjda enters and wins a school competition. Upon being questioned on what she will do with the prize money, Wadjda responds with, "I will buy a bike," in which Ms. Hussa interjects and announces that the money will be donated for a selfless higher cause.
يعني مو من الأحسن نتبرع بمبلغ الجائزة لمثلا أخواننا في فلسطين.
It is apparent that Ms. Hussa's technique in sculpting her students into obedient and submissive valued members of society is highly effective. However, for Wajda's sake, school is not a place for enlightenment, but rather a disciplinary center to produce pious women suitable for marriage. Both Wajda's mother and Ms. Hussa represent two social institutions that deny the full articulations of Wajda's non-conformist tendencies. They both resort to shaming as a disciplinary technique in grooming Wadjda to conform to gender norms and expectations of womanhood valued in her society. It is apparent that Wadjda herself does not possess any aspiration to be altruistic or even set an example for a higher cause. Despite the efforts around her, Wadjda does not care for these rules and regulations, and she's not interested in playing these societal games. Al-Mansour's decision to have the bike be the primary plot device is brilliant on multiple levels. Firstly, since the bike is synonymous with childhood, it only enhances the fundamental narrative of the coming of age. Owning a bike is almost like a rite of passage for childhood. In essence, for Wadjda, it is completely understandable for her strong desire to want one, especially since the other kids in the neighborhood all play together with their bikes. Wadjda just wants to play with the others, doing what she enjoys. Despite all the discouragement from everyone around her, Wadjda establishes a few side hustles to earn the money for the bike. She makes mixtapes, friendship bracelets, and she even goes to the length of swindling 40 Saudi riyals from her schoolmate and her lover by being a courier. The most impressive demonstration of ambition and sheer will is that she even memorizes the whole Quran simply for the 1,000 Saudi riyal prize money, with the full intention of using it all on purchasing the bike. Abdullah, Wadjda's best friend, teases her constantly as she will never beat him in a bike race. When Abdullah lends Wadjda his bike to practice with in advance, he installs training wheels. Although originally installed with good intentions, Wadjda gets upset and lashes out at him. She takes this act as a direct jab at her gender and hierarchical status in society and states, "You put on the wheels because you think I'm a little girl." This demonstrates her acknowledgement of the societal stigma around women as well as women with bikes. I mean, how could she not, when everyone around her constantly reminds her that, here, girls cannot ride a bike, or bikes are not for girls, do you think you can act like a boy? Nonetheless, she is still determined to learn, play with, and beat Abdullah in that race. And despite all the flack Wadjda gets on her journey, she gets her happy ending. The bike is obtained, and she does beat Abdullah in that race. Secondly, the imagery of the bike is utilized as an icon in female independence and freedom, popularized by the 1890s American suffragette movement, in which Al-Mansour replicates the historical significance of the bicycle and adapts it to serve as a critical transnational backdrop to the narrative of female empowerment in Wadjda. Originally perceived to be a man's tool or a boy's toy, the bike becomes Wadjda's vehicle of breaking already established gendered boundaries. Considering this, Wadjda's obsession and unwavering motivation is understood on a much more complex level. From her society's perspective, a woman should not ride a bike because it would affect her chances to have children, as Wadjda's mother explains.
البنات هنا ما يركبوا سيكل وبعدين إذا ركبتي سيكل ما تقدري تحملين ولا تجيبين عيال.
هذا أنت ما ركبتي سيكل وما جبتي عيال.
مش هالكلام يا ماما. أنا بغيت أموت وأنا أجيبك.
As we all know, there is no gain without pain, and for this, I also want to refer to Wadjda's mother. For the most part, it is evident that for Wadjda as a character, the bike represents childhood and doing what she enjoys, whereas for her mother, it is something significantly deeper. For her, it is a device to shatter ingrained gendered constrictions and is an icon of what the future can hold. Like with the American suffragette movement, the bike becomes a symbol of change. This is demonstrated when Wadjda's mother comes around to the idea and buys the bike for her. Whether this is her mother telling Wadjda to go live her life independently or such is something else on its own. However, considering that her mother was the biggest obstacle throughout the film, this gesture of purchasing the bike alone is a massive step. And it's also sweet how the shopkeeper kept the bike for her the entire time. These gestures represent a form of acknowledgement and acceptance that the tides are changing, as well as the conscious decision of being part of this change. To further support this, Wadjda's mother cuts her long hair. She is seen throughout the film carefully straightening and combing it because Wadjda's father loves her hair long and straight, so she kept it like that for him. Hence, the cutting of her hair represents personal freedom as she flirts with the established gendered boundaries within her society and personal life. I also want to point out that this is a realistic crossing of these boundaries. Being synonymous with freedom, movement is a vital theme throughout Wadjda. On the most explicit level, the object of Wadjda's desire is a bike, an inexpensive and simple form of transportation. More explicitly, the film is set in Saudi Arabia, where the concept of female movement is often at the forefront when discussing Saudi politics and society. With a simple equation of the bike, a young girl, and set in a notoriously restrictive society, Al-Mansour quickly establishes to spectators what to expect, i.e. what the main obstacles, issues, and themes are going to be within the film. When interviewed about Wadjda, Al-Mansour states that she did not want to give foreign audiences a false impression that it will be easy or an acceptable thing for a girl to ride a bike around Riyadh, so it was hard for her not to put a bleaker ending on Wadjda's journey. With this in mind, I have a deeper admiration for Wadjda as a film, not only because it is interesting and funny, but also because it is made by a Saudi Arab woman who acknowledges the relationship of cultural and religious standards and expectations. Moreover, she understands the complexity of womanhood in Arab societies as well as the duality of how the West perceives this relationship. Al-Mansour uses Wadjda as a tool to introduce and include spectators, whether they are foreign to the Arab world or within it. She handles this controversial topic so skillfully. Al-Mansour reminds spectators that these attitudes does not just affect our protagonist, but is also an actual widespread issue. She gives life to an intellectual debate about the significance of womanhood within the kingdom. In a 2012 interview, Al-Mansour states that the bicycle is a metaphor for freedom of movement that does not exist for women and girls in Saudi Arabia. And there are many examples of these physical restrictions. For instance, Wadjda's mother, who must commute to work with her colleagues in a private driver because she's not allowed to take public transport or even drive herself. Wadjda's mother trying on a dress in a shopping centre bathroom simply because there are no dressing rooms available. Throwing a wrench into this ideology is Layla, Wadjda's mother's colleague, and she decides that the 3 hours commute without AC is not worth it, and she switches jobs to work at a hospital much closer to home. However, the catch is that she's unveiled and working directly alongside men.
وجدة؟ هلا والله أسبرت وين وراك؟
ليلى متى صرتي تكشفين وجهك؟
Immediately, this might not seem that significant, but for women like Wadjda's mother, this is unthinkable, blasphemy, and lastly, groundbreaking. Wadjda's mother's decision to cut her hair and buy the bike for Wadjda suggests that she has come to acknowledge the importance of movement and freedom for women within her Saudi community, and coming to this conclusion alone takes a lot of courage. On the surface, Wadjda is a simple film about a girl on her bike. However, this narrative is pushed further beyond explicit means and becomes almost synonymous with female independence and the freedom of movement for Arab women, more specifically Saudi women. The bike represents independence, mobility, freedom, and imagination. Wadjda depicts a narrative reflective of the reality and the obstacles of being a woman in a Saudi society. Al-Mansour does not point fingers at anyone, nor does she blame. She simply displays the obstacles and with her character of Wadjda demonstrates the kind of person that is required to question and break these boundaries. I don't think Wadjda is consciously trying to change her society or even take a political stance. I think she frankly does not care. This issue is bigger than her and she knows that. She's innocent, but she's not blind. She just wants the bike and she will get it, whether she breaks established gendered boundaries on the way or not. It just so happens that she ruffles some feathers and breaks these boundaries. This is demonstrated by her lack of discouragement as she reworks her situations to her benefit. She is smart on her feet and she is not afraid to let others know of her intentions. Al-Mansour adds a reliable voice to the discussion about womanhood in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Saudi has a long way to go in the terms of female equality, as women are often excluded from society and educated into submission. They are also excluded from the discussion about feminism and womanhood within the kingdom. But the kingdom is taking steps in the right direction, in which it is promising not only for the attitudes of those within Saudi communities, but also how others from the outside perceive this change. By doing so, Al-Mansour mirrors the fundamental themes in Wadjda with the core elements of the current Saudi Arabian feminist movement. This mirroring goes beyond Wadjda and is reflected in her mother, her classmates, and those within her community. Al-Mansour highlights and breaks down her cultural ideologies while simultaneously adding a distinct perspective to the discussion of female independence within Saudi Arabia and the Arab world.